throw people off of food stamps who need it. It creates a cynical, non-existent work program, and it creates an incentives for states who are going to reap the benefits of lower food stamp rolls to throw people off even further. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
We reserve our time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my colleague. Mr. Speaker, here we go again. Social Darwinism, survival of the fittest at its worst. And what's ironic is it's a program that works. Cutting $40 billion, 3.8 million Americans thrown off supplemental nutritional assistance that works, that gives them a ladder to success. Children, the disabled, adults that find themselves in a difficult period for a period of time. The distinguished ranking member of the Rules Committee points out 9 months is the average. Don't do this. In a different Congress at a different time and a different issue, there was a famous lawyer who turned to Joe McCarthy and said, "At long last, sir, have you no decency?" I ask that of this Congress on this very important issue. Have we no decency? I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
Reserve my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
My colleague just asked the question, and I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend. My colleague just asked the question about have we no decency? Have you no decency? And these are good friends here. We're colleagues. We come to work for America. But all who can read and all who can feel the pain of hunger should ask the question and should beg and plead, don't cut SNAP. $40 billion. $3.4 billion in meals and 24 meals a month for a family. Unless you have the cure for poverty, 46 million Americans, then how dare you come to the floor and eliminate a lifeline? Yes, school breakfasts, but what about the children who are from 0 to 3 to 4, who are at home with parents, who are at home with the families, the spouses of active duty soldiers who use food stamps? And then the absolute insult, a state like Texas that is prosperous, you give them the instruction to cut people off of food stamps and then give them a bonus for hurting people and taking their life away.
Mr. Speaker.
This is
Mr. Speaker, regular order, please.
Vote down this
Gentlelady's time has expired.
bill. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
Gentleman from Texas has 2.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Massachusetts has 2.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Texas has 1.5 minutes remaining.
Okay. Can I ask the gentleman how many more speakers he has?
I appreciate the gentleman asking. I am down just to the close, and I thank the gentleman for seeking that information.
Mr. Speaker, before I close, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record letters from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the United States Conference of Mayors, AARP, and a list of a number of other groups that are opposed to the bill.
Without objection.
And I'd also like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a September 4th New York Times story entitled "On the Edge of Poverty at the Center of a Debate on Food Stamps."
Without objection.
And, Mr. Speaker, I will yield myself for the remaining time.
Gentleman is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in an era of billion-dollar defense overruns and bank bailouts, the Republican leadership wants to nickel and dime poor people. This is a rotten thing to try to do. But it's not too late, Mr. Speaker. We can defeat this bill and still go to conference on the Farm Bill. We can defeat this bill and make it clear that the United States Congress still has a conscience. We can defeat this bill and reestablish the long and proud tradition of bipartisanship on this issue. Remember Bob Dole working with George McGovern and Bill Emerson working with Tony Hall. We can defeat this bill and get back to the work of actually ending hunger in America, rather than making hunger worse by passing a bill that cuts $40 billion out of this program and throws 3.8 million people off the program. And to suggest that this bill won't hurt people, that it will not cut people from SNAP, is just plain wrong. Read the bill. Read the bill. The 109-page bill that didn't go through committee that's before us under a closed rule. Read the bill. This will impact not just people who are trying to look for work and can't find it. It will impact senior citizens. It will impact children. And it will impact veterans. 170,000 veterans will be cut from this program. Shame on us if we do this. You know, I would say to my colleagues on the Republican side, I know a lot of you believe as I do that it's important that we maintain a safety net for the most vulnerable. I know you believe that it's important that we should end hunger in America. I know you believe that it's wrong to cut $40 billion from this program. And I'd urge you and I would plead with you, stand with us on this. Stand with us and reject this move, this harsh move, this rotten thing to do to poor people. I think you will be proud of standing up against this bill. This is the wrong thing to do. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill. Do the right thing. Let's do something in a bipartisan fashion that we can be proud of. And defeating a $40 billion cut to the food stamp program is the right thing to do. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Today we follow the pattern that we did yesterday in talking about the needs of this great nation, not only men and women who are unemployed, but who also need the benefits of the food stamp program. And today, the Republican Party, as a result of the work we did at the Rules Committee, is bringing several bills in this rule, two of them talking directly about jobs and job creation. One, Hood River, Oregon, the gentleman Greg Walden coming and talk about, please give us a chance to have jobs. Our people want jobs. They don't want to be on food stamps. They want jobs. A narrow, political, shrill agenda, environmentalist agenda, is the reason why we don't have that, the Democrats and Barack Obama. Secondly, Arizona. Arizona is asking for 3,700 jobs, $60 billion worth of economic activity right in this bill. They are jobs. They are jobs bills. We are trying to do the things that the Republican Party talks about. That's the middle class of this country, jobs and job creation. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule, yes for jobs, yes for the underlying legislation, yes so that we can employ people back at home, rural areas, people who don't have jobs, yes for the opportunity for the Republican Party to once again stand on this floor and say, we believe the legislation that is here is better for America than the policies that we have today. The policies of unemployment, the policies of less than a 40-hour work week now to a 30-hour work week, the policies of taxes and spend. So I yield back the balance of my time and I move the previous question on the resolution for jobs in America.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. Sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 352 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 55, House Resolution 352, resolved that upon adoption of this resolution it shall be in order to consider in the House the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes. All of the joint resolution are waived. The amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The joint resolution as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the joint resolution as amended are waived. The previous questions shall be considered as ordered on the joint resolution as amended and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations, and 2, 1 motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2. It shall be in order at any time from the calendar day of September 26, 2013 through the calendar day of September 29, 2013 for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15. The Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this section.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to my good friend, the gentlelady from Rochester, Mrs. Slaughter, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
During the consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purposes of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Rules Committee met and reported a rule for consideration for H.J. Res. 59, the continuing appropriations resolution for the fiscal year 2014. The rule is a closed rule and provides for the consideration of a short-term continuing resolution keeping the government funded until December 15, 2013. The rule provides for 1 hour of debate equally divided between the chairman and the ranking member of the Committee of Appropriations. Additionally, the rule incorporates an amendment by Representative Scalise which fully defunds Obamacare and also ensures that the government prioritizes interest and principal payments on our national debt and Social Security payments in the event that a debt limit is reached. The rule also provides for 1 motion to recommit with or without instructions. Finally, the rule permits the Speaker to entertain motions to suspend the rules from September 26 to September 29. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend my friend Chairman Rogers for bringing a bill to avoid a government shutdown to the Rules Committee. Within the Republican conference, we've had a very spirited debate on this issue. However, it's led us to a good product. There are a number of things I like about this bill. First, it extends the funding for operations of all federal programs until December 15th, allowing the Appropriations Committee the needed time to finish its work on the 12 full-year spending bills. Second, this continuing resolution adheres to the post-sequester caps of the Budget Control Act, maintaining our commitment to reduce the deficit. Third, this bill fully defunds Obamacare. Mr. Speaker, it seems the closer that we get to the implementation of the Affordable Health Care Act, the more unpopular it becomes. Already, the President has agreed with Congress to make major changes to this legislation on 7 different occasions. Additionally, he's delayed major provisions like the employer mandate unilaterally another 7 times. If business is chafing under these mandates and in need of a delay, then surely the American people should be given the same relief. The continuing resolution provides them that relief. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this legislation provides certainty to our creditors that they will get paid. Some of my friends on the other side have called this the, quote, Pay China First Act. However, nearly 70% of our debt is owed domestically. This legislation would provide for the prioritization of U.S. bondholders and people on Social Security at the front of the line to be paid if the government hits its borrowing limit. Mr. Speaker, this is the responsible thing to do. Some have said that this is just brinksmanship and an attempt by Republicans to lead to a government shutdown. That could not be further from the truth. The Appropriations Committee has brought this bill to the floor explicitly to avoid the threat of a shutdown. It's a good bill, and I urge the support of the rule and the underlying legislation. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
I thank the gentleman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, Mr. Speaker, and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, if the House of Representatives fails to act, the government will shut down on October 1. A government shutdown would result in the furlough of hundreds of thousands of government employees, stop the flow of Social Security checks, hold up Medicare benefits for our nation's seniors. In short, there are very real and very significant consequences to what we do here today. Given the stakes, one could reasonably expect the majority to avoid extremism and partisanship and allow the chamber to keep the government open, but this bill doesn't do that. Unfortunately, the opposite is happening here today. Unable to pass 8 of 12 annual appropriations bills, the majority has been forced to resort to a continuing resolution, and the CR should have been clean, as the CR is in the Senate. But today's proposal includes a self-executing amendment to defund the Affordable Care Act and to put medical decisions back into the hands of the insurance companies, and that will not go through the Senate. So we will once again go to the very brink of disaster, hoping that we can pull out of it, but letting most Americans hang by their thumbs, wondering what we're going to do. As the newspaper The Hill wrote this morning, today's proposal makes shutdown more likely because the Affordable Care Act will never be repealed as long as President Obama is in office and the Democrats control the Senate. The fact of the matter is the Affordable Health Care Act is already delivering on its promise to lower health care costs and give us more secure health care. States are 11 days away from opening online health care exchanges where individuals will be able to compare health plans and purchase an insurance plan that fits their needs. In many cases, these exchanges will allow individuals to purchase health insurance cheaper than ever before. In my home state of New York, the premiums for some insurance plans have already dropped by 50%, and this week Secretary Sebelius announced that many monthly premiums will be less than $100. But perhaps most importantly, and something I'm not sure everybody knows, the Affordable Care Act flips the script and takes the power out of the insurance company's hands. Instead of having a lifetime and an annual cap on what the insurance company will spend on your health, the Affordable Care Act enforces limits on what you will have to pay out of pocket for your health care. Now, does everybody know that? Because I'm going to tell you, when your constituents find it out, they're going to be really bummed out at you for trying to kill it. For example, in 2015, those covered under a group health insurance plan will not have to pay more than $6,350 out of their pocket for medical procedures and medicine. That is such a gift that people will no longer have to go bankrupt to pay health bills. And that point is going to be covered from that point on. Once you've reached that limit, your insurer is going to pick the rest of it up. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that my constituents don't want to lose that. It's a landmark change and one of the many reasons why the majority's attempt at repeal would never become law. Today's legislation falls short when it comes to ending the devastating cuts within what we call the sequester. The sequester has been one of the most devastating policies ever implemented in the history of the United States. Just today, the head of the FBI, the new director, said that the idea of having to get rid of 300 employees and putting all of his employees on 10-day furlough makes it almost impossible for him to run the FBI. Because of the sequester, tens of thousands of cancer screenings have been canceled at public health clinics right now, and more than $1.6 billion has been cut from the National Institutes of Health, and more than 70,000 children have been kicked out of Head Start. And over the next 12 months, the CBO estimates that 1.6 million jobs will be lost because of the economic drag caused by the sequester. Now, last night, the Budget Committee ranking member, the top member on the minority side, Chris Van Hollen, came to the Rules Committee and requested to have a vote on the House floor in order to end the sequester. That was the 8th time that his request has been denied by the Rules Committee. Given a chance for bipartisan cooperation and to rid ourselves of this plague that is so worrying and doing such devastation to the country, they simply walked away. And finally, today's legislation also includes a proposal to protect some bondholders. including China, from any economic fallout that would occur if the majority refuses to lift the nation's debt. That legislation has no place in a continuing resolution, and furthermore should not ever have been considered, for the faith and credit of the United States should never be in doubt. Mr. Speaker, every member of this House is sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States and to promote the general welfare, and that's a far cry from what we're doing here today. Not only in this bill, but in the one that just preceded us, where we're cutting $40 billion out of food that will affect, as you heard before, numbers of veterans, the elderly, Meals on Wheels, school nutrition. I mean, it's not what we are, not what we do. Everybody knows, though, that what is happening here today is what every mother knows. When a child has a tantrum, and a tantrum is being had here over health care, you slap a pacifier in the mouth. And that's exactly what trying to redo the health care bill every time is. It's a temporary tantrum retarder so that we can get by today. There is no real plan. It's just how will we get by today and heck take tomorrow. Now, after the majority passes this bill, the Senate will take the legislation. With a pure majority, they can remove the partisan attacks within it, and they will send us back a clean CR if they can get 60 votes, which we will have to pass or chaos will ensue. And by the time we get around to all this, which we could be doing today, well, we are right on the edge of the cliff. Now, in the meantime, the majority's refusal to work on a balanced plan to create jobs, to grow the economy, to invest in our future, which is such an important thing that's been neglected, and stop the brain drain being caused by the sequester that hurts our economy and threatens a government shutdown. With time running out, this decision to play politics has dire consequences. Think about it for just a moment, the reports that we've gotten with the substandard bridges and roads and the neglect of the railway. If we could put all those people to work that would be needed just to rebuild those and spend some money on ourselves instead of $2 billion a week on the war as we did during the Iraq 10 years. So I urge my colleagues to vote against today's rule and the underlying legislation, and we then, I hope, would consider bipartisan solutions instead of games. I can promise you that our side stands ready and willing. We had nothing to do with any of this today. It came up somebody else's office, but no Democrats were involved. We want to be a part of it as well. Thank you very much, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
As usual, my friend makes a skillful and thoughtful case in defense of the Affordable Care Act. The problem is, if the jury is the American people, they're still not convinced, and they haven't been convinced for 4 years. Repeatedly, poll after poll after poll has shown this to be an extraordinarily unpopular piece of legislation. In fact, I'd suggest my friends probably lost their majority in their pursuit of this legislation, and it was their continued defense of it that may well have cost them the opportunity to regain that majority when the President was reelected. If you look at the evidence, it's not only unpopular. As we approach the implementation date, more and more of the people that support it are asking either for delay or for it to be overturned altogether. We had a lot of labor unions recently march down to the White House and request the President. These are people that had helped pass the bill. Please fix it, change it, delay it, do something. It's going to hurt our members and their families. We've had businesses, the President himself acknowledged, well, gosh, this bill isn't working very well. We're going to have to delay it for a year for all sorts of businesses. We've been told repeatedly that this was someday going to become popular, but I would suggest the experience of not weeks, not months, but years have taught us that it's never going to be popular with the American people. My good friend also talked a little bit about the sequester, and I think that's worth visiting about again because we probably have some common ground there. I would suggest that we ought to get rid of the sequester. But let's remember how it got here, what it was designed to do. Sequester is in law because of the President of the United States. He's the one who proposed it. He's the one who advocated for it. He's the one who signed it into law. We all agree it's not a very artfully drawn piece of legislation, but the President insisted on it. We twice in this House acted to provide opportunities to get rid of sequester. Neither time did our friends on the other side pick up those opportunities, either in this chamber or in the Senate, nor the President of the United States. We are more than willing to renegotiate sequester. We are not willing to give up the savings. We would like to spread those cuts and savings over the entire budget, and we think we could work through the problems without surrendering the savings unilaterally or raising taxes, another thing which we don't think is the appropriate way to deal with this particular piece of legislation. My friend talked about food stamps, not directly relevant for our debate, but it's worth thinking for a minute that under President Bush, the amount of money we've spent on food stamps doubled. And under President Obama, it's doubled again. In other words, 100% and another 100%. All our bill is suggesting that perhaps there's 5% of that massive increase at a time when unemployment is coming down and the economy is supposedly on the mend, that we could, through reforms, reclaim and save. That's all this is. Finally, there was some discussion of the Senate and what it will and won't do. I learned a long time ago not to try to predict what the Senate of the United States is going to do, and some of the colleagues, frankly, on our side of the aisle have been asking for an opportunity to express their opinion on Obamacare and have an opportunity to get in the fight. I think they ought to have that opportunity. And frankly, I suspect there are some Democratic senators who may be on the ballot for the first time since voting for Obamacare that might want to reconsider their positions, and if not defund, perhaps delay. But in any event, our job here is to do what the American people sent us here to do. That's number one, to fund the government, which this bill certainly does. And number two, in the case of the majority, to repeal, reform, delay, or somehow postpone Obamacare. That's what we're doing. We'll send this over to the Senate. We'll see what our colleagues can do over there. They've got some remarkable tools that we don't have. They have things like cloture. Doesn't exist on our side of the aisle. Things like the filibuster. Doesn't exist over here. And again, a political situation that suggests they may be able to find allies. Regardless, they certainly deserve the opportunity to have the fight and the debate and the discussion that they requested. And I think this House is acting wisely and well in giving them that chance. Once they've made their decision, and we're not here to express the will of the Senate, they're certainly not there to express the will of the House, then they'll send something back. And at that time, I have no doubt that we'll pick it up and react to it and try to respond in an appropriate fashion. But nothing is going to begin until we pass something out of this House. That's what we're trying to do today. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Appropriations, Ms. Lowy.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
I rise today in strong opposition to this rule. Last night, the Rules Committee spent nearly 3 hours discussing the merits of health reform, food assistance in the Farm Bill, and U.S. debt held by foreign entities. Yet very little time was devoted to one of the primary jobs of the legislative branch, which this bill addresses: appropriating funds. This rule adds a provision to dictate to the President in what order to pay the nation's bills in case of default, and another provision to defund the Affordable Care Act. The President issued a veto threat this morning based on these extraneous provisions. We should be focused as sharply as a laser beam on the American economy and jobs. This brinkmanship on the budget and the debt limit will force the stock market to plummet and businesses to freeze hiring. Continuing sequestration, as this bill does, will cost our economy up to 1.6 million jobs over the next year, according to CBO. That is why I join my Rules Committee colleagues and urge the House to reject the previous question to get a vote on the Democratic amendment to stop the sequestered job loss. Voting to add politically motivated provisions to the CR is akin to voting to shut down the government, and shut down the government means shutting down the nation's economy. Nonetheless, Republicans place their ideological crusade against health care reform ahead of the American economy and jobs. I urge my colleagues to reject this rule.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself just a minute to respond quickly, if I may. I want to assure my good friend we have no intention and no desire to shut down the government. Absolutely not. If that was our aim, we wouldn't be bringing a bill to the floor whose main purpose is to keep government funding open. And we want to take the 75-day window, roughly, and sit down and negotiate with our friends and make sure, particularly my friend and our chairman, Mr. Rogers, have an opportunity to work through the appropriations process. So that's not our intention. As for the President's concern about sequester, again, I just remark this was his idea. This was his proposal. He signed it into law. He's not an innocent bystander in this process. So if he'd like to sit down and redo it, we are more than happy to do that. But he's not going to dictate the outcome from the White House. With that, Mr. Speaker, if I would, I'd like to yield such time as he may consume to my fellow member of the Rules Committee, my classmate, distinguished physician from the great state of Texas, Mr. Burgess.
Gentleman from Texas, recognized for such time as he may consume.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding. Of course, we're here today to discuss the rule that will allow the continuing resolution to come to the floor, and coupled with the continuing resolution is language that will forever affect the funding for what is known as the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. And let us pause for a moment to remember how the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was visited upon the United States of America. This was not something that was a product of any House hearing. This was not something that was a product of the House in any way. This was a product of the Senate Finance Committee, developed between Thanksgiving and Christmas in 2009, put on the floor of the Senate on what I like to describe as the darkest evening of the year, in a cloture vote, December 21st, 2009, followed by a vote by the Senate on Christmas Eve. Many of you will remember that day. There was a snowstorm descending upon Washington, D.C. The senators wanted to get home. They wanted to get out of town. So they simply voted one after the other until they got the 60 votes for the Affordable Care Act and then left town under the cover of darkness. They never thought that what they were voting on Christmas Eve 2009 would ever become law. But a funny thing happened. A dog ate my homework, and I turned in the rough draft, and it accidentally got signed by the President 3 months later, and that's where we are today. That's why this law has been so difficult to implement. That's why the American people have never embraced this, and now more recent polling in the past several days shows that the American people actually reject what is being visited upon them. Headline in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, Walgreens has told their employees, well, guess what, we're not going to pay for coverage any longer, we'll give you money. Good luck in the exchanges, and we'll see you on the other side. UPS dropping family coverage. The unions wrote the minority leader in the House of Representatives and the majority leader in the Senate and said, please help us. Please help us. We've helped you. We manned your phone banks. We walked neighborhoods for you. We got you elected. The administration is not listening to us. You have broken the contract with the middle class by voiding the 40-hour work week. By redefining full-time employment as 30 hours, you've essentially broken the back of the middle class. The American people, regardless of political persuasion, are crying out for our help. And fortunately, today and tomorrow, we are going to be able to provide them that help. We're frequently hearing about 40 or 41 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I'll tell you what, as many as it takes. But 7 of those efforts to restrict and repeal portions of the Affordable Care Act, 7 of those have been passed by the Senate and signed by the President. So it's not entirely a fruitless effort, but probably more telling is the President himself, who has, whenever it suited him, simply jettisoned a portion of the law, a law that he signed in March of 2010. And we all remember, those of us who were in the House at that time, those of us who watched news shows during the summer of 2009 and on into 2010, the cry that went up, we've got to do something about people with pre-existing conditions. There are just far too many people in the country who are frozen out of the insurance market because of an unfortunate medical diagnosis. But the reality is, the large group plans in this country have open enrollment periods, so the pre-existing condition conundrum generally is a problem for people in the individual and small group market. How do I know this? How do I know that this number is much more manageable than the 8 to 12 million people that then Speaker Pelosi and the President of the United States talked about? Because on the eve of the Supreme Court's ruling on the Affordable Care Act, when I thought it was going to be important for this House to respond to those people who had the federal pre-existing program taken away from them by a Supreme Court action, I did an investigation. How many people have been signed up in the so-called federal PSIP program? The number at that time was 65,000. By the end of the year, it was nearly 100,000. And then, Mr. Speaker, something really strange happened. On February 1st of this year, less than 2 years after the Affordable Care Act was signed into law, people showing up at the teller's window over in the Department of Health and Human Services saying, I'd like to buy my insurance in the federal pre-existing pool, were told, sorry, that window is closed. We will only take care of the people who are already enrolled. If you're coming in today wanting that kind of help, so sorry, program terminated. There were no headlines in that regard. There were no cries of anguish that the President has stopped providing coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. You had people who were waiting the 6-month waiting period. They were required by law to wait and not have insurance to show up for this federal pre-existing pool. But what did they hear when they got to the window? Sorry, sister, window's closed. Go somewhere else. 11 months from now, you'll have the full Elysian fields of Obamacare, and maybe if you can make it to then, you'll be fine. Well, what else went by the wayside? Remember the discussion about we're going to put a cap on out-of-pocket expenses, so no longer will people have to pay excessive co-pays and deductibles. Oh, by the way, they postponed that for a year. That was supposed to start January 1st of 2014. Now it's been put off to January 1st, 2015. The Small Business Health Exchange, supposed to open. We're going to get that power of competition in the small group market. It was supposed to open January 1st, 2014, delayed for a year, January 1st of 2015. And who can forget the Tuesday evening before the 4th of July holiday this year, when on a blog post, Valerie Jarrett put out that the employer mandate was, in fact, suspended for a year. 3 days later, they had to say that, oh yeah, by the way, all of those reporting requirements that we were requiring under the employer mandate, we're not going to require those either, and we're just going to trust people to tell us the truth when they come in to sign up for benefits. Not that any federal program administered by the Department of Health and Human Services has ever had a problem with fraud or misrepresentation. You know, probably one of the most telling things is the lack of anyone within the agency to be able to answer a simple yes or no question about will the exchanges be open for enrollment on October 1st. The head of the Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight was in our subcommittee of Oversight and Investigations just this morning. I asked that question. A simple yes or no, sir, is all that I require. I got a long answer that, yes, there will be websites, yes, you will be able to access websites. Yes or no, will people be able to go to register for insurance on October 1st? They could not give me a yes or no answer. Second question, what about will people be able to sign up for the insurance on January 1st as advertised? Yes or no, again, unable to give a yes or no answer to that question. Will people be able to buy insurance cheaper, as the President suggested when he was running for office? Unable to answer with a yes or no question. These are the problems that we have, Mr. Speaker. We cannot get people from the agencies to come and give us a simple answer, a simple direct answer to a simple direct question. No wonder the American people are full of questions about this. No wonder they are full of fear about what is just around the corner. This rule vote will allow the House to vote on a bill that keeps the government funded and open until December 15th of this year. But that vote, very importantly, allows people's voices to be heard that they do not trust what is included in the Affordable Care Act. They feel that the investment has been a bad investment so far, and they are telling us not one more dime, don't sink one more dime into this. I will yield back the balance of my time to the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Gentlelady from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, the ranking member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, HHS, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this cynical and reckless rule and the underlying funding bill. This is neither a serious nor a good faith effort to address the fundamental responsibilities in our budget. Instead, the majority is trying to hamstring the government. They want it to be broken, and they want to make it seem like it cannot address real problems. And that is why now they are committed to pushing us headlong into a government shutdown, whereby they would leave the American people on their own in what are difficult economic times. This rule does not responsibly address our budget in any way. Instead, the majority is using the resolution to ensure that their dangerously low funding levels are the ceiling for future budget negotiations and to try for over the 40th time to thwart the law of the land and to derail the Affordable Care Act, which denies affordable health care to families. We passed the Affordable Care Bill in the House of Representatives. We passed it in the United States Senate. The President signed the bill. The Supreme Court upheld the bill. But now this crowd wants to stop it by not providing the money to fund it, and they want to repeal it. The American public says, don't repeal the Affordable Care Act. Don't do that. Let's implement it, and yes, if there are fixes to be made, let's do that. Because right now, children can no longer, their parents can no longer be told by an insurance company, we won't provide insurance coverage for your child that might have asthma or autism or anything else, because we have regarded that in the past as a pre-existing condition. It is no longer a pre-existing condition. Quite frankly, what they want to do is to turn your insurance, health care insurance coverage back to the insurance companies that can say no. I say to them, get over it. It's the law of the land. Let's implement it and make the changes. And while this majority plays games, the deep and dangerous across-the-board cuts, which they are trying to enshrine in this bill, are threatening our economy, our health, our well-being, and the future of American families. Both the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke argued that these across-the-board cuts will cost us as many as 750,000 jobs. That's not all. We got children, the gentlelady?
I'd like to yield another minute.
Thank
you.
Lady. More than 57,000 children losing access to early learning, to a Head Start. You can't make that up. When you've lost that Head Start slot, that child can't go to school, that early learning opportunity is done. That is about the future of that youngster. They would cut off biomedical research that saves lives. I'm a cancer survivor. They would cut off the research that provides us with the opportunity to save people's lives in this nation. They cut money for the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for the Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration. They are for instructional services being sharply reduced, education cuts. There are similar cuts in place to every other national priority we care about. Court system, food safety, transportation, you name it. And instead of fixing these cuts, the majority is trying to make it worse for American families. This resolution is not a serious attempt at addressing the budget. It is an ideological charade. Its purpose is to shut down the government and leave the American people on their own. I urge my colleagues to take no part of this and reject it. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield to my great friend and the chairman of the Rules Committee, distinguished member from the great state of Texas, Mr. Sessions, such time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the young gentleman from Oklahoma for his service not only to the Rules Committee but also the Appropriations Committee, that he very aptly serves this honorable body well. Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised that we're seeing the hysteria that we are. The people who are screaming the loudest are the people that insured through trust me, no other reason other than the things that they voted for, no unintended consequence to have this country go from a $9 trillion to a $17 trillion deficit in just 5 short years. They made sure that this country has become unemployed, that we no longer really have careers, that there is not only hundreds of waivers that have been given to the political friends of this president. Uncertainty is all across this great nation about employment. People who want to sign the front of paychecks, who want more employees. It is rampant across America of uncertainty and answers that cannot be given about this massive government-run health care plan that is getting ready to face this nation in just a few short weeks. That's why the Republican Party is on the floor of the House of Representatives today. That's why we're here to say we're going to make sure this government gets funded. But the main culprit of uncertainty, of hugely rising insurance and health care costs is the Obamacare. It is not an Affordable Care Act. And by the way, I think it works about this same way in Moscow as it does in Havana. It is an out-of-control health care system that will diminish America's greatest health care system. So what we're here today is to join House Republicans, Mr. Speaker, in our efforts to prevent Obamacare from becoming reality. Since Obamacare was proposed in the House in 2010, I and my Republican colleagues, not just from North Texas, as you heard here, Dr. Michael Burgess, but people from Oklahoma and all across this country who've stood firmly to say that we believe that our fight against a government health care run system is exactly what the American people want. My Republican colleagues and I in the House are doing everything we can to stop Obamacare through voting to repeal it, defund it, and to dismantle it. And I am proud of that effort. Obamacare is bad for jobs. It's bad for jobs all across this country. That means it's bad for our economy, and it's bad for our nation's health care systems. Doctors all across this country are united, as well as consumers, to say we must do something about it. Up to 60% of Americans today are worried about the quality of health care and how they will pay for this expensive product that Democrats have brought to America. Obamacare will jeopardize 3.2 million jobs across this country in the franchise industry alone. These are people that before had an opportunity to put food on their table that now are having to struggle to pay for this Obamacare. Additionally, hardly a week goes by that we do not hear stories about companies having to force their employees off their employee and off their preferred employer-provider insurance. President Obama stood right in front of where you are, Mr. Speaker, just a few years ago and said that famous, what has turned into a lie. If you have health insurance, you can keep your health insurance. That is not true. Today, we are learning that this is not just the case with just a few people, but also just effective yesterday, Walgreens has announced that they will move 160,000 of their employees off their current coverage. That is why Republicans are on the floor of the House of Representatives today. We are trying to pass the same message to our colleagues in the other bodies so that they are able to take the fight, so that Americans understand that we not only hear them, but we're willing to do something about it. I want to thank the gentleman from Oklahoma for yielding me time, and I end my speech today by saying this, that Republicans will continue to fight for jobs, better health care, and an opportunity for every single American to have a job to make this country even stronger. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, let me yield myself 30 seconds just to say that while I did not make any federal case out of it here, I deeply regret that my colleague has disparaged the President of the United States. Mr. Hoyer and I both wish I could give him an hour and 40 minutes to counteract what we've heard, but unfortunately I can only give him 3. Mr. Hoyer, the gentleman from Maryland, and the Democratic whip.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
You know, I need that hour to correct so much misinformation, but I got to say something to my friend from Texas who's now left the floor or is about to leave the floor, and just remind him, during the last 18 months of the Bush administration, we lost 4,491,000 jobs. Over the last 42 consecutive months, in the private sector, we have gained 7,452,000 jobs. That, my friend, is 11.5 million turnaround to the benefit of workers. Have we done enough? We have not. Now, let me speak to this perverse rule. Let me first say to my friend, Mr. Cole, who, like so many of his Republican colleagues, continues to say, the President signed this cloture bill. He did. Why did he sign it? Because our Republican friends threatened, as they are doing today, to put the United States of America into default for the first time in history if he did not. That was the threat. It's the threat again today. Mr. Cole, my friend, would not really support that policy, I'm convinced. He doesn't have to have a colloquy with me, but he would not support that. The sequester, however, he did support. In the cut, cap, and balance bill that was totally voted on by Republicans, a few less than my hand of Democrats, who said that they wanted the sequester as the fallback position. They got it. They got it because that's the only deal they would make. The President doesn't want sequester. I don't want sequester. And the chairman of his committee doesn't want sequester. And let me assert, without undermining his credibility, I don't think Tom Cole wants sequester. And by the way, I have a quote here which indicates that Eric Cantor, the majority leader, doesn't think sequester is so hot either. Here's what Hal Rogers said, however, and I would like to debate this for some period of time, but I don't have the time. With this action, we pulled the transportation bill. The appropriation process is broken, irrelevant, dismissed. And by the way, when they marked up their first 3 bills that they passed the House, they didn't use their sequester number. They used the number that the Senate is marking to, because they knew their number doesn't work. Their number that is included in the bill that would be the result of this rule. And Mr. Cole, you're my friend, and I have great respect for you, and I think you believe that. But here's what Hal Rogers said. With this action, pulling the transportation bill, the House has declined to proceed on the implementation of the very budget it adopted just 3 months ago. Mr. Rogers, conservative, Kentucky, Republican, chairman of the Appropriations, said, I believe the House has made its choice. Sequestration and its unrealistic and ill-conceived discretionary cuts must be brought to an end. Can I get another?
Absolutely.
I'll take another.
How long?
I hope I can give you 2.
2 minutes. I'll take another 2 minutes. He then went on to say, the House, Senate, and White House must come together as soon as possible on a comprehensive compromise. This bill represents zero compromise. Come together on a comprehensive compromise that repeals sequestration, takes the nation off this lurching path from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis, reduces our deficits and debt, and provides a realistic top-line discretionary spending level to fund the government in a responsible and attainable way. I've been here for some period of time. I know about compromise. My side needs to compromise. There is no compromise yet on the other side of the aisle, ladies and gentlemen. None. Zero. And I say lamentably, and I say this with great sadness, in my view, there are only about 60 on your side of the aisle who want this hard-line approach, this unrealistic approach, this approach that the senator from North Carolina who served in this House and on the Appropriations Committee said was unreasonable. Now, let me tell you what one of the Heritage Foundations, the Chief Executive Heritage Foundation said. We're pushing back on these gimmicks. Who was the gimmicks? Mr. Boehner and Mr. Cantor, saying we'll pass it, we'll get a vote on health care. If they reject it, we will still fund government. Your side wants to defund government. It may not want to shut the door on government, wants to defund it badly and undermine our national security, our economy, and the operations of the government. And every member of the Appropriations Committee knows that to be the case. No member of the Appropriations Committee, in my view, Republican or Democrat, believes that the sequestration levels that are in this bill, that this rule provides for, are viable. They will not work. They will hurt Americans. But what does Michael Needham say about these gimmicks and about pursuing this? He says, I think it's exciting. It's a game. It's a game that will hurt America. Reject this rule. Reject this bill. Let's have real compromise, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
You know, I know that Bob Woodward is a widely read author, and I can look at the book sales that he racks up and know that there's a lot of people in this town that read what he has to say. But evidently my friends on the other side have never read what he had to say.
I read his book.
Let's be clear. Sequester was the President's idea and proposal. Now, where I agree with the President is that I think we need to save money in the federal budget. And sequester was supposed to be a trigger to force that negotiation. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, I was not a member of the super committee, but I think all of them worked hard and in good faith. I cast no aspersions, but they didn't get there. So sequester, the President's recommended method, happened. We would still like to sit down with the President and our friends on the other side and renegotiate where those cuts occur. Sequester is about $85 billion on an annual basis in a $3.5 trillion budget that is over roughly $700 billion out of balance as it is. So the idea that we can't find 2.5% if we negotiated over the entire budget, I think is probably, frankly, not a very sustainable proposition. We could do that without some of the distortions we're going through now, and we would be more than happy to do that with my friends on the other side and certainly with the President of the United States. But let's be clear. Now, I'll hold my time, but I will yield in a moment. But let's be clear whose idea this was and who has not put a solution on the table. I could go ad nauseum into cuts that did not have to occur in the Defense Department that have occurred because the administration insisted on them, but that's for another time and another debate. And I agree with my friend that this is the time to come to a deal. And that's what we're trying to do actually in this rule and in the underlying legislation. Set aside a 75-day window and sit down and let the appropriators and those above them come to an agreement, and let's get out of this cycle. I agree with my friend of short-term fixes and deals, and let's move back to what I know my friend wants to do, and that's to establish regular order. But to do that, we have to start the process. We have to begin now. Let's pass this resolution. It reflects the will of the majority. Let's move it to the Senate. Let's see what the Senate is prepared to do. They will send us something back. And then hopefully at the end of that process, a CR will be arrived at. My friend alluded to the fact that people want to shut down the government. That's the last thing we want to do. And I thank my friend for accurately putting my position out there on both government shutdown on default. I've made it abundantly clear. I think those are bad ideas. I thought they were bad ideas, by the way. Tom Coburn quotes me in his book in 1995 telling him not to do it. I was his political consultant back then. So I've never thought this was an appropriate tactic in government. I don't think we need to do it now, but let's do that. And at the same time, let's give the Senate an opportunity to vote up or down, whatever they want to do, on Obamacare. We've gotten to do it multiple times. They seem to be anxious to have the opportunity, think they should. But they will send us back a product, and I'm sure we will respond. With that, I'll give my friend if he had a point he wanted to make.
I thank my friend for yielding. I might say not only have I read Bob Woodward's book, I invited Bob Woodward into my office, and we discussed this assertion that you and others like to refer to ad nauseum, very frankly. Does the gentleman agree that before that was ever suggested by Jack Lew to Harry Reid as a possible way to getting us not to default on our debt, that you and the overwhelming majority, all but 8 of your colleagues, voted for your cut, cap, and balance bill, which had within it, in July of 2011, a sequester, so that this was a proposal that you put in legislative action.
Reclaiming my time, it's certainly true that we've had multiple proposals to try and limit spending. We walked in with a $1.4 trillion deficit, so we thought maybe we ought to try and bring it down a little bit. Now, is it the exact form of this sequester? Absolutely not. Absolutely. No Republican ever came up with a sequester that had 50% of the cuts coming out of defense. So in that sense, I don't think you can equate them. But regardless, we agree. Well, let's not argue over history here for a minute, although, again, just for the record, I too have had Bob Woodward in my office, and I actually had him sign 60 of those books that I gave to my colleagues because I thought it was such an interesting look, and the players and the process are still the same. Bottom line, let's pass this legislation. It's going to move out of the House. Let's let the Senate act. Then let's see what they send back to us, and let's act in turn. Just quickly, because I'm running low on time, and I do have other speakers. But
does the gentleman, just short, does the gentleman